Story. The ring came off, so did the mask. I wasn't supposed to see it. I was fumbling with my coat zipper, digging for the house keys, trying to make sure we weren't late again. Because with Nicole, we were always late. But when I turned around to ask if she had the gift for her director, she was standing at the mirror near the door. And I caught it. One quick movement, barely a second. She slid her wedding ring off her finger, smooth, practiced like she'd done it 100 times before, and slipped it into the side pocket of her black sequined clutch. My hand froze on the zipper. She saw me see her. We locked eyes in the mirror. 3 full seconds of absolute silence. She blinked once, smiled like nothing happened, and said, "Ready, babe?" I said nothing. I just nodded, like a man whose entire chest had been hollowed out, and followed her into the cold November air. The drive to the Whitmore Hotel was 15 minutes I will never forget. I watched traffic lights change from green to red and back again, and I said nothing. I gripped the steering wheel and tried to act like a normal man. My throat felt like I'd swallowed a fistful of sand. I asked her if she was nervous about the year-end presentation tonight. "Not even a little," she said, not looking up from her phone. That was the moment I knew. Something irreversible had happened to us. Because Nicole was always nervous. She rehearsed conversations in the shower. She once spent an entire Lyft ride practicing how to greet the company's regional director. But tonight, cool, effortless. Like I wasn't even sitting next to her in that car. Like I was her driver. We arrived 20 minutes late. The ballroom was already alive. Soft jazz drifting over cocktail laughter. Women in floor-length gowns. Men in expensive suits checking their phones. I carried both our coats. Nicole walked 5 steps ahead of me without looking back. Every so often she'd glance over her shoulder and wave me toward her with this small, impatient flick of her hand. The way you'd signal a valet. I smiled and followed. Because that's what I did. I smiled and followed. We were standing near the dessert table, or rather, I was standing near it, awkward and alone, when Nicole appeared from somewhere in the crowd holding 2 glasses of champagne. She handed me one the way you hand a stranger their change, then immediately started scanning the room over my shoulder. Searching. I tried to do something small, something human, something that reminded both of us that we were still married. I reached out and gently took her hand. She flinched. I felt it before I could explain it away. And then she leaned slightly toward me and whispered, barely moving her lips, "Don't let anyone here think we're a couple." Not in anger, not in embarrassment, in strategy, like being connected to me was a professional liability, a public relations problem she hadn't solved yet. I laughed. God help me, I actually laughed. The nervous laugh of a man who still believed this was a misunderstanding he could fix on the drive home. But then something inside me went very still, and very cold. I set my champagne glass down on the white tablecloth, stood up straight, and said, loud enough for Nicole and anyone standing within 6 feet to hear, "From this moment, we're not." She blinked. Her lips curved into the faintest smirk. She didn't say a word. And as I turned to walk away, I passed a man in a charcoal gray suit standing near the bar. Not glancing, watching, closely, the way a man watches something he feels entitled to. I kept walking, but I did not forget his face. I didn't make it past the hotel lobby before I turned back. Not for her, not to beg, but something wouldn't let me leave. That gut instinct, the one you spend years training yourself to ignore because you're afraid of what it'll confirm. It was screaming. I positioned myself behind a large decorative pillar near the ballroom entrance, feeling ridiculous, watching through the glass. And then I saw it. Nicole crossed the room toward the man in the charcoal suit. She didn't walk. She floated, like gravity worked differently between them. He didn't smile when she arrived. He barely looked surprised. She leaned in, said something close to his ear, and his hand, slow, unhurried, completely natural, settled on her lower back like it had rested there 1,000 times before, like it belonged there, like I was the one who didn't belong. I left then. I sat in my car in the parking garage on level 2 for almost 2 hours. I stared at the concrete ceiling and told myself every story I could think of. Work, friendship, old colleague, nothing physical. I am being insecure. But here's what I've learned since then. When a man is inventing reasons his wife would remove her wedding ring and tell people they aren't together, he isn't being insecure. He's just catching up to a truth that's been living in his house without his permission. When Nicole came home that night, she smelled like champagne, and something that was not her usual perfume. Something warmer, darker, not hers. I asked how the evening ended. "You didn't miss much," she said, setting her clutch on the counter. I stood there in the kitchen and thought, I missed the part where my marriage stopped pretending it still existed. I missed everything, and I was not going to get the truth from her. So the next morning I called in sick from work. She left for her 9 o'clock Pilates class. And 20 minutes after she pulled out of the driveway, her iPad lit up on the kitchen counter. A message preview from a contact saved as simply M. One line. "Last night was electric. We should have done this sooner." I did not need to guess. I opened the thread. What I found was months of careful planning. Flirtatious messages that escalated into something unmistakable. Hotel reservation confirmations under a corporate card Nicole told me was strictly for client emergencies. Every term of affection she had slowly stopped offering me, she was generously giving to someone else. Every night she came home drained and distant. She had been fully alive somewhere else, for someone else. And the detail that hit hardest, M was married too. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table and read through every message from beginning to end. Not to torture myself, though it did that anyway, but because I needed every fact I could carry. I cross-referenced dates with my own calendar. The Saturday I spent shoveling ice off our driveway during the February storm, she was checking into a suite downtown at the Aldridge Hotel under a booking labeled Marketing Offsite. The Tuesday I stayed home sick with a flu and texted her 3 times asking her to bring soup. She was at a rooftop bar in Midtown with him. M called her his little wildcat. She loved it. She sent him photos I hadn't seen in years. I tried to remember the last time she'd sent me anything playful. I landed somewhere around 2019. It was a thumbs-up emoji. I screenshotted everything, backed it up to a flash drive, then duplicated it to 2 more. Then I called a lawyer named Patrick Hines, referred to me by a coworker who'd been through something similar. I walked into his office with a manila folder, a flash drive, and what I imagine was the look of a man held together by pure adrenaline. Patrick reviewed the screenshots and said one word first: thorough. Then he said something that knocked the air out of me. He told me Nicole had quietly restructured our joint savings account 6 months prior, changed the signature requirements so funds could be transferred with only one authorization. Then she did exactly that. Moved the money, used a digital signature that was supposed to be mine, and the bank processed it without question. Patrick pulled the paperwork. It was forged, and it worked. She had drained $41,000 from our shared emergency account. The transfers went through Venmo, chunked out in amounts small enough to avoid automated flags. The memo labels on each payment read like a grocery list of innocence. Yoga retreat deposit, team dinner split, shared cab, anniversary booking final balance. $41,000. I had been home cleaning the gutters and comparing roof repair quotes, while Nicole was funding a second life. I didn't cry in Patrick's office. I didn't raise my voice. I just stared at the printed transaction list, the way you stare at wreckage, with a strange, detached calm that comes right after something very large has collapsed. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had robbed me. She had staged a careful, deliberate dismantling of everything we had built together, while I was still ironing her blouses and remembering how she takes her coffee. I asked Patrick one question before I left. If I stay quiet and let this develop fully, what can we do? He looked at me over his reading glasses and said, if you're patient, we can dismantle her very carefully. That was the first moment since this started that I felt something other than grief. Felt like control. Felt like a plan. Once I stopped mourning her, I started remembering things I'd filed under trust for years. The business weekends where she never brought home a receipt. The fresh manicures during months she claimed we were too tight financially to fix the ceiling leak above the bedroom. The way she'd take calls outside on the back porch in winter, standing in the cold, rather than speaking inside with me. Every crack I had plastered over with the assumption of good faith now looked like a deliberate fault line. So I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I called Meredith Holt, Nicole's former best friend. They'd had a falling out I was never given the full story of. Nicole dismissed her as a jealous burnout who couldn't stand watching other people succeed. Meredith answered on the second ring. And before I could even explain why I was calling, she said, "I've been waiting for this." She didn't sound bitter. She sounded like a woman who had been watching a slow-motion accident for years and was finally relieved someone else could see the debris. When I asked if she knew who M was, she went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she laughed. Not cruelly. More like the laugh of someone releasing something they'd been carrying too long. "M is Marcus Hale," she said. "Her ex. From before you." I stopped breathing.
Marcus Hale.
The one Nicole used to describe as the most damaging relationship she'd ever survived. The toxic one. The one she swore she had completely, finally, permanently left behind. He had moved back to the city 14 months ago. Nicole had somehow forgotten to mention it. Meredith then told me the real reason she and Nicole no longer spoke. 4 years ago, she had caught Nicole exchanging messages with Marcus and confronted her directly. Nicole denied everything and cut her out of her life within the week. So this was not new. This was not a moment of weakness or a sudden emotional crisis. Nicole had been orbiting this man for years, waiting, and the moment circumstances aligned, she ran toward him, like she'd been aiming at him all along. Armed with everything I had, Patrick commissioned a forensic financial accountant named Gregory Walsh. Gregory spent 2 weeks going through 26 months of Nicole's accounts, her corporate card, and several Venmo profiles. What he found extended far beyond what I already knew. Tax misreporting, systematic corporate card abuse, multiple payments to a shell LLC Nicole had co-signed 3 months earlier for a luxury apartment on the Upper East Side of the city. The other signatory on that lease?
Marcus Hale.
While I was power washing our deck on summer weekends, Nicole was building a second home with a man she'd told me ruined her. Gregory produced a 51-page report. Patrick submitted it to her attorney before the first scheduled hearing. I was told the silence in their office afterward lasted nearly 4 minutes. The next part required the most difficult thing I have ever made myself do. I had to stay completely ordinary. I complimented her on a jacket. I picked up her preferred brand of sparkling water from the grocery store without being asked. I made a playlist for her commute, soft indie rock, the kind she claimed to love when we first started dating. She smiled more in those weeks than she had in months. She let her guard down, the way people do when they believe they have already won. And while she settled comfortably into the belief that I was still that loyal, clueless man, waiting patiently in her shadow, I made one final move. I invited her to dinner at Bellagio Rosso, the same Italian restaurant in the West Village where I had proposed to her 9 years ago. I requested the same corner booth. I wore the gray blazer she once said made me look less like a man who cataloged spreadsheets for a living. I brought flowers. When she sat down across from me, her smile was the one she reserves for important meetings. Warm, practiced, calibrated. "This is sweet," she said, with only the slightest note of suspicion underneath. "I wanted tonight to feel significant," I told her. And then I sent a text to the only other guest I had invited. Marcus Hale walked in 11 minutes later. The smile left Nicole's face like someone had pulled a plug. She went pale, not the flush of embarrassment, the cold white of a person who has just realized the door she left open behind her is now closed in front of her. She didn't say his name. She didn't say anything. She stared at me. Marcus slid into the booth with the expression of a man who had just walked into a deposition he hadn't been told about. I let the silence sit, for exactly long enough to feel permanent. Then I placed a manila envelope flat on the center of the table. No drama, no raised voice, just the soft sound of paper landing. These are the screenshots, the transfers, the lease agreement, the dates, the Venmo records, a statement from Meredith Holt establishing the full history of what this actually is, and paperwork already filed by my attorney for financial misconduct and marital fraud. Nicole stared at the tablecloth like it owed her something. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks. Neither of them spoke. You drained our savings, I continued, while I was home folding bath towels and buying you oat milk. You lied to my face every single morning. And you put everything we built together on the line, so you could run back to a man who used to make you cry yourself to sleep, while I pretended not to hear you. Nicole opened her mouth. I raised one hand. This isn't a fight. It's a courtesy call. I'm letting you know, before the professional consequences begin. I stood, buttoned my blazer, and then I leaned in just close enough that only she could hear. One more thing. The other person I invited tonight was Marcus's wife. She should be getting a call right about now. Nicole's hands went flat on the table. Marcus knocked over his wine glass standing up. I walked out before the shouting started, crossed the street, and stood in the cold for a moment with my hands in my pockets. Not triumphant, not relieved, just quiet. The fallout I knew was already in motion. I expected Nicole to retreat after that. Instead, 3 days later, I was served papers at my office, in front of 2 colleagues and a bewildered FedEx delivery man, from an attorney representing one Nicole Hale. She had already started using Marcus's last name on the paperwork. Inside the envelope, a countersuit, emotional neglect, chronic unavailability, passive aggression, and the audacity of all audacities. She was requesting spousal support, monthly payments, from me, for the disruption to her lifestyle. I laughed out loud in the middle of a staff budget meeting. My manager asked if everything was all right. I told him I had just been asked to financially compensate someone for cheating on me, and that it was inexplicably a regular Thursday. But behind the absurdity, I recognized what she was doing. She didn't know the depth of what I had. She thought this was still a word war, a blame contest she could win by going on offense first. She had no idea about Gregory Walsh's 51-page report. She had no idea that Patrick had already forwarded the expense fraud documentation to her firm's compliance office. She had no idea that Marcus's wife had agreed to appear as a witness. The night before our first court date, Nicole showed up at the house. No text, no call, just her standing at the door in the rain, mascara tracking down her face, voice stripped of its usual precision. She asked if we could talk. I let her in, not because any part of me wanted her back, but because I needed to see what version of herself she would perform. She said she never wanted it to end this way, said Marcus had gone cold since the dinner and was blaming her for everything, that she felt used, alone, that maybe we could begin again quietly, just us, no lawyers, no courts, a clean start. I listened to all of it. Then I walked to the hall closet and came back with a printed copy of Gregory's report. All 51 pages. I set it in her hands. If I ever doubted that I was being systematically deceived, this removed that doubt. She flipped through the first few pages. Her hands trembled. "You're going to destroy me," she whispered. "No," I said. "You handled that part yourself. I'm just making sure there's a record." She left without another word. And for the first time, she left quietly. I won't say the courtroom felt like justice. It felt like surviving something that should never have begun. Nicole was already seated when I arrived, composed in a dark blazer, her lawyer whispering something close to her ear, but I could see her foot bouncing steadily under the table. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know how much. My lawyer presented the financial timeline like a clinical case study. The fake Venmo accounts, the fabricated corporate expense reports, the Shell LLC, the forged signature. Nicole held her composure through most of it. Then Marcus's wife took the stand. She brought screenshots of messages between Nicole and Marcus that predated everything Nicole had admitted. Some from 3 years ago, During the week, Nicole and I flew to Sedona to celebrate our 7th anniversary. The messages were read aloud. The courtroom went very still. The judge's expression did not move, but his eyes did. Nicole's attorney asked for a recess. It was denied. Nicole then requested to address the court directly. She stood, looked at the judge, and said, yes, she had made mistakes, but for years she had been emotionally invisible in her marriage, that I had withdrawn, that she had been desperate for connection, and that context mattered. The judge asked if she had documentation to support this. She did not. What she didn't know was that I did. 3 handwritten anniversary letters. A printed itinerary for a couple's retreat I had booked 8 weeks before her affair began. A trip she canceled the morning of, citing a migraine. Voice messages, emails, everything I had kept because I am, at my core, a man who keeps things. My lawyer set it on the table. Nicole sat down. She said nothing else after that. The judge denied the spousal support claim in full. The court ordered partial financial restitution for the misappropriated funds. Attorney fees were awarded, and the matter of the fraudulent expense reports was referred to a separate formal review. With Nicole's firm already having launched an internal disciplinary process that Patrick had quietly set in motion weeks earlier. Outside the courthouse, Nicole walked past me without speaking, shoulders drawn in, face straight ahead. I watched her go, and I felt almost nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, just the strange, exhausted peace of a man who finally knows exactly where he stands. She moved her things out of the house 3 weeks after the ruling. She left behind a ceramic pot she never used, 2 books from a reading club she dropped out of, and a photo from our 4th anniversary in a cracked frame. I packed all of it into a cardboard box, taped it carefully, and left it at the front desk of her new building. No note, no message, just a clean goodbye from a man who is finally done. The professional consequences followed quickly. She was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Marcus relocated again within 2 months. The woman who had moved through our shared life like she held every card was now standing entirely alone in a hand she dealt herself. A few months after the dust had settled enough to breathe, I did something I had been postponing for years.
I booked a solo trip.
Just me.
No compromise. No negotiation.
A cabin near a lake outside Asheville, North Carolina. I brought 3 paperback novels, my old 35mm camera, and 1 medium-sized suitcase. I turned off my phone for 5 days. I hiked trails that were exactly as difficult as I wanted them to be. I ate when I was hungry and slept when I was tired. And for the first time in longer than I can honestly remember, I breathed, without bracing for whatever was coming next. On the last evening, I sat by a fire near the water. I talked to a woman at the next campsite for about an hour.
No sparks.
No movie moment connection. Just a genuine conversation between 2 people who had nothing to perform for each other. At some point she asked me, "What's the kindest thing you've done for yourself this year?" I didn't have an answer right away. I just laughed. A little raw, a little honest. But that question stayed with me the whole drive home. The kindest thing I did for myself this year was stop holding on to someone who had let go of me a long time ago and simply never told me. I'm not bitter. Some days I'm still a little angry, and that's fine. I've earned that, but mostly I'm rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, on ground that actually belongs to me. I joined a photography group in my neighborhood. I've been hiking every other weekend. I still overthink everything and fold my socks in matching pairs, because that is simply who I am, and I have stopped apologizing for it. To anyone out there who's been carrying something like this, who feels small, invisible, replaceable inside their own marriage, don't wait to be rescued. Don't keep extending grace to someone spending it somewhere else. Get the truth, get the clarity, and then walk, not out of bitterness, out of the very simple and completely non-negotiable knowledge that you deserve better. Thank you for listening.